forget is at the beginning, because at the end of it you'll probably be, maybe disappointed. No, you won't be disappointed. We've got such an illustrious panel. On top of that, I know it's the afternoon, probably had lunch, and it's sort of almost not quite the graveyard shift, so we'll try and make it as interesting as possible. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'll introduce the panellists in a minute. I'm David Yarnton, I'm director of Gfinity, which is an esports company which listed here in London on the second board in 2014. I was trying to look at it and I thought, I've been to a couple of talks earlier today, and they're talking about culture in companies and diversity. And I realise now that the reason I'm here is to help with diversity by having old people as well. But I've been in the games industry since 1986, which is over 30 years. So a lot of you guys probably weren't even born then, or even a twinkle in your mum and dad's eyes. And so I was with Nintendo, launched about, I was trying to add it up the other day, about 8 or 10 different consoles, from SNES, Game & Watch, things like that. And in 2012, I started thinking about what I do with life, and I love sport. I manage a national rugby union team, so competition, love that, and video games. I've been with it all my life, so what better thing to do than get sport and video games together and esports. So that's when I joined Gfinity. Our panel, I'll start from right to left. Mo, he's just recently joined Riot Games, but previous to that was with Wargaming as in looking after their esports. So huge amount of experience. He's been also with Blizzard and NCSoft, so probably get a little bit more detail with his background when we kick off. And I'm James Dean. He's the Managing Director of ESL here in the UK, but he's been in, probably I'd say, apart from Craig, who's been in esports in the UK for,
I used to go to his events.
Yeah, I was going to say. I think we probably started off in the orders, not right to left, it's age as well, moving up the ranks, with the youth on the far side and the pensioners up this end. So James Dean from ESL helped start it, created his own business here, and then in 2016 ESL Germany bought and became a subsidiary. And obviously everyone knows ESL, they're the biggest esports company in the world, as in events and that. And then Craig Fletcher, who's been almost in games as long as I have, but he started off very much in the dial-up days in 1994 running Doom tournaments, and progressed there with a company called Multiplay, running large events with Insomnia, but also I think I've seen earlier server hosting and then esports as well. And Multiplay was bought out by Game in what, 2015. And I was going to say that actually Craig's retired now, but he hasn't. He's now moved into a different area of business, and that's as an entrepreneur and founder of a company called Wicked Sick. We did have another person, but they unfortunately had some issues. Just a little background. You guys probably, you're all sort of familiar with video games, and the fact is, I've seen numbers come up. Currently 2.26 billion gamers in the world, going to be 2.5 billion gamers in the world by 2020, and at the moment they estimate probably about 192 million people that are interested in esports. And then by 2019, 2020, they're talking about 286 million, which really, I suppose, to some extent, is not necessarily a huge number, but I think when you start looking at people in esports, it's the passion that they have and the reason they're into esports, and I think the guys will explain a little bit more about how important communities are. It's really the hot topic a lot, I think, at the moment, esports, and it's a bit sort of, I think, misleading because, some of the numbers, I've even seen numbers put up here by other speakers about the numbers of people viewing esports comparison to, football, American football, ice hockey and things like that, and they say, oh, look how big it is, but they fail to actually break down that they lump esports all in as one thing rather than these are individual sports, which is a little bit what the esports ecosystem is a bit like, where there are tribes, where people don't necessarily follow everything. And also all the money that's in talk about. But we want to hear from these guys because they've got all, hopefully, the expertise and experience as well. Just if you wanted to give a little bit of brief background first of yourselves and start from Mo, because I only
just brief one as time is short. Mo, I'm the head of esports UK now, joined Riot 3 months ago. Before that, 6 years at Wargaming, head of global competitive gaming. focusing heavily on grassroots, building up esports for a game which was never designed to be an esports. And now we aim to do the same thing more or less for grassroots upwards in the UK. And naturally, Riot has plans for upcoming products, which is experience come very handy in there.
And similar, actually, from a UK aspect, one of our jobs is to build up grassroots esports, so national leagues, for example, but also bring big events to the UK as well. So actually become a foundation of potential opportunity globally for the UK.
Yeah, well, I think you did a good introduction there. I think you got most of it from dial-up Doom 2 leagues to massive LAN parties of today. But yeah, when we were at Game, I think one of the things that we did there is we opened these gaming centres called Belongs. That's something to, because we never really had an internet cafe culture in the UK. It never really took off. When you look at Korea, there's a PC Bang on every corner. So there's 20 open in the UK now, these Belongs. There's one on Wardour Street, and Game themselves are also trying to pivot away from high street retail. I think all of us know where that, unfortunately, where direction that's going in, and to pivot to be more an experiential company. Right now, I'm consulting, reevaluating life, and seeing what I'm going to do next, and helping people with access to funding and letting the next generation of entrepreneurs achieve their dreams.
Yeah, I hope the whole concept of Belong works, because I think it would be pretty hard having Bang cafes here. It just wouldn't work culturally, would it? One of the things, because this is sort of predominantly a bit of a, when I say mobile conference, so if I looked at it, sort of my background is much more console and handheld, and in some respects a lot of our people have more PC background, etc. So I wanted to try and sort of push it towards that mobile side, and I know a lot of people have spoken about games like Vainglory and Clash Royale and Honour Among Kings, which are the sort of big ones, the big names. There's lots of money. I mean, I've seen numbers of Honour of Kings saying something like 400 million income a month in China for the game. So, huge sort of numbers. And there's really big participation rates. But to me, is the viewing numbers of these sorts of things. And, what does the future hold for mobile? Because to some extent, I think when we've spoken about esports, and the previous speaker that was on stage before, I thought was really good, because he talked about esports being not just the players, but the people viewing. Some views on how mobile can overcome some of these issues.
I think to start with, it's about the depth of the game itself, and sinking that 10K hours into a game itself, and that's what builds that viewership in, because you're interested in obviously seeing how other people play. That was the premise of watching other people play in the first place. Obviously around that, the personalities start building up, the teams, the players, different IPs coming into that space. So you move towards that experiential environment, and that's where we start to see that viewership really grow. So right now, like I was saying earlier, mobile esports probably less than 10% of the global esports viewership. That's just going to continue to grow in amongst the growth of esports viewership as a whole, just as that kind of franchise within the mobile environment will start to encroach in the bigger space.
Yeah, well, as people have already said, mobile, there is no barrier to entry. Just about everyone on the planet now has a smartphone, or soon will. So I think that's certainly that interesting talk on India just before, in terms of it's all Apple. Apple isn't even there; it's all Google Play. And earlier today we had some of the insights from the likes of Super Eva Megacorp and some of the mobile-centric games. But I think that's it, because esports has always had a high barrier to entry. You needed a high-spec gaming PC, and then there was figuring out how you got involved. You either knew someone who was in it, things like that. Whereas discoverability is key, and opening up to that big audience of mobile gamers. But then,
how does the, say, spectator experience, how does that develop?
Well, I think you see the quality of the content on mobile has got. We're a long way from Snake now. It's and you see people like Razer. On your presentation, you had the Razer phone. The quality of the mobile experience is catching up to PC quickly. I think if you look at the developments of GPUs in mobile, they're catching up rapidly to where we are now. So I think that's the quality of the experience. So the viewership. You've got high definition games now, so you can view the high definition games. So I think that for me is breaking down that boundary and getting more people used to watching as well as playing, which is the case if you look at YouTube and things like that. I think that's what we'll see moving forward now in terms of...
Mo, I mean, if you look at your backgrounds, heavily PC-based as such, and, if we now look at Riot Games, any thoughts?
Yeah, clearly. Esports, yeah, it's a big thing. It's a beacon right now. But I truly believe esports is just, it's really the beacon. That's it. There's something way bigger happening. It's the evolution behind it. Meaning the technology is changing. Everyone talks about now mobile esports. The next thing, esports is just the content right now which we identify with here. This is what the user watches. If you look at our viewerships now, massive audience of them are just viewers. They're watching for the purpose of entertainment. So the next generation of players or viewers are changing their habits. They don't watch TV anymore. It becomes a part of culture, part of the new society habits. And I believe this is where mobile will help overall through technology, that people use it as, instead of watching a Hollywood movie, they watch now the content which is running right now. Maybe an esports event, maybe a team training, whatever, but it's something that identifies themselves with.
I think ultimately we won't be talking about mobile as a specific platform. Basically, it will synergize to the point where just talk about a particular game. Are you watching it? Yes or no? And that's your discussion point. So we won't even talk about esports in a way. We'll just be like, are you watching League this weekend? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. About two speakers before spoke about his passion. What he wanted to try and achieve was that esports, became ubiquitous across all platforms. That it wasn't really whether it was a mobile, whether it was PC or whatever it was. It became just, that particular game. And I think hopefully the technology as it develops and that will help do that. I mean, I think one of the things too. I mean, and I know with all of you guys, community is such a big thing. Do you see mobile as an opportunity to help expand community and potentially, we start looking at streaming on the go so they can watch content wherever?
Naturally, you have to be there where the players or the viewers or the audience is. And mobile is an essential piece. I moved to London 6 months ago, and it's surprising for me to sit in the train like this with like 1,000 people, and everyone looks at their phone, whatever they do. I see streamers and people playing, so I would say even 80% of their free time they spend on these devices. So naturally, we have to be there to engage, to grab the viewers.
Yeah, I think over 50% of an esports current user base is consuming over 25% of their content on a mobile platform. Anyway, whether that's video or music or gaming, obviously. So that will obviously continue to grow. And I think about when I look at my 6-month-old son, I think, well, the first thing he's going to know is a mobile phone, and that will be his entertainment platform. That will be his gateway. He won't even think of it as being a mobile device at all. He will just know that that's where he's going to get his content from, whether that's streaming to a TV or a computer screen or whatever. It's all it's completely boundaryless. That's not a word.
Boundless ecosystem. Yeah, so for me, esports is community engagement, and in particular enthusiastic community engagement, and it always has been, whether it was the forums we used to have to now you've just got very disparate communities, whether it's on Reddit, whether it's on Facebook, you've got to go where the audience is, and that's, as we say, you build communities, but you don't just build one anymore on a forum or in a games lobby or something. You build lots of communities. It's like multiple touch points. You've got to go where the users are. I mean, I heard recently someone said to me, well, we won't have mobile phones in 10 years' time, which I was like, immediately like, really? We won't have mobile phones? And what they were talking about was, what we haven't mentioned is VR and AR, is where could that go in terms of esports and engaging with people? Is like, how far are we from a contact lens that is your mobile phone, for example, or even an implant? So there you go. I'm really taking us off onto some futurist stuff there.
That's potentially what we want to look at here, because it's the ideas in the future, hopefully, that we can try and flesh out. I mean, to be really honest, I was always very sceptical about mobile for esports as such, but over the last few months and 6 months or so, I've started seeing so much change and development there that I've sort of, I won't say 100% converted, but really see the opportunity a lot more. Maybe it's just because I'm a bit slower to adopt things like that. With one of the things that I think a lot of people here look at esports, and as I said, the numbers, oh wow, when they look at communities, especially when you look at Riot with the League of Legends, got such a strong community, their base is and they're passionate about it. And then a lot of people say, oh yeah, I've seen the Riot numbers, and they go, well, I'm going to invent, and I think someone else said, you don't just make an esports game and think it's going to work. It's very much community driven. Mike, can you give us a bit of background as some of sort of with Riot how that's, because also people forget these successful games in esports, the Dotas, the League of Legends, etc. They're not brand new. They've been around for a while.
Exactly. This is as well, I believe, one of the main reasons why it's so successful, because we're one of the first happening at this right time, right game, right audience, created the game which really focused around the player. Really, for me, the onboarding was amazing. It's the first company, I work for many companies, which really focus the players first, no matter what. It's really like the culture thing. And based on this, you could really see when you go to meetings with a CFO and the CFO tells you, okay, what did the player want? It's a new experience. I said, okay, that's great. But around this, you could see Riot focused heavily on sustainability for the top teams. From the beginning, they said, okay, we have to make sure these teams sustain, no matter what. Even if there is disconnection in the ecosystem right now, there was not a pyramid system. It was not like a funnel feeding really into it at the beginning, but they understood, hey, there is a big group. People want to see the superstars, so we have to make sure that they sustain. They sustain for 2, 3, 4 years. They're going to be there, so we can use them as pillars, like shining stars, to build the rest. So it was really, as you could see, year by year, increased viewership, increased engagement. The last one, average time watched over an hour, you know, when we get to this, and this is like millions of viewers, you know, we're reaching a point now where it's become a complete normal habit, but it took time, and you need a clear vision, dedication, that, okay, what are our top priorities? We have to give sustainability to the teams, and then each year onwards, we build another layer. Now with the layer, what I starting in UK as well, okay, how do we build now the massive grassroots for the 90% of the players and the 95% of the viewers?
Is that because of churn, you need to develop that? Is there much churn? I mean, to the extent that do people drop off, or is it, you know, I get a mortgage, a wife, I can't. You know.
Funny thing is, not the old guys. We have like meaning old guys, the ones who started with LoL as well. When you look at the viewerships and you see so many initial players are still watching, are still participating. I saw a beautiful presentation from a colleague at Twitch, and said, yeah, for LoL, he said 50% average are not actual players. They can connect them. We have some different numbers, but you could see that they have numbers where it's okay, 50% of the players or viewers are not actually playing for them, like database-wise. So they are engaged, most likely reactive viewers, reactive players, whatever they come from. But these are old school players. So there's something with LoL and esports, I believe, the guys with Counter-Strike, the best example. If you look at the viewership, look at the audience, these are the hardcore. The core is the same group still, they just built this culture around them, and I believe this is a strong momentum in esports.
I must admit, I mean, I like watching Counter-Strike. I can't play because I'm just too slow.
I think we do see some games, though, turn quite quickly. I think in the past, say Rocket League, for example, we saw some. You see games start to bubble through and create a bit of hype, and whether or not that then continues to snowball, so to speak, to get to that critical mass is another question. So Dirty Bomb was an interesting one, and then that was then steered into a different path. You could argue they weren't listening to the community, so it wasn't going to build from that perspective. PUBG, new game, very quick to rise to the top of the charts, but actually behind that whole format was Brendan Green, who I think he's on his 4th game, and he finally found a game developer that listened to him and see his project from start to finish. He knew exactly what the community was looking for. He had a methodology of persuading the developer to take his direction. So I wouldn't say, I think within esports, new IP is going to continue to come through and work through, but it's going to be incremental to the whole industry in the large part. I think we don't see too much churn in terms of saying, right, I've spent 10,000 hours on League of Legends, I'm just going to ditch that and go to Overwatch. It's not going to be, it's going to be quite a tough change to make.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the fact that community crowns esports. It's not the other way around. You can do things to give them what they want and lay the foundations, but ultimately, if you build it, they don't always come. So, yeah, and that's certainly what you're saying there about listening to the community, put the community first, and above all, make sure some of them are in your company, because otherwise, would that person buy the game that you're making? Would that person play the game that you're making? If the answer is question mark, something's wrong. You've got to do it. So I think that's something people to bear in mind. You can create the foundations, but ultimately you're at the community's mercy.
I like an analogy earlier someone made about the 10,000 hours and the fact that where you see a lot of games and video games area who got huge installed bases and they've tried to push them into esports, but because they release every year a new version, if you've invested 10,000 hours in that particular game, becoming a professional or expert, and then next minute they change it again, it's a lot of sort of frustration there. So I can see how that, I quite like that analogy. Just a quick one, I think, because it's very short time. Oh, we are good, are we? Oh, right. Okay, cool.
Don't say that.
Got about 6 more questions to go. I've only done the first one. Because we're looking to try and sort of impart sort of knowledge to people as such, and your experience from various areas. And we've had people talking about China, India, Korea, and so therefore we do know, I mean, obviously there are cultural differences between, and not just with countries, but potentially with games as well. East versus West, games that are popular in the East aren't so popular here. Sport versus MOBA versus first-person shooters. Esports, do you find that much? I mean, territories, and especially, with what's successful somewhere and what doesn't, or are there ones? What are the best ones that transition over different areas?
So personal beliefs, we know there are big differences naturally, especially with East and West. And I heard before as well, India, a big thing, growing market, potentially with new technology evolving. Same for us if we look at China, everyone knows, but if you look as well at the Middle Eastern area or South America, it's a crazy, massive market with a perfect player base. It's evolving, so we have to keep them in mind as well. But what you just asked, yes, esports is different, I believe, as well. How it's perceived, how it's taken, the communities are different. But what is the same is the entertainment factor. Humans want to be entertained. It's a basic thing. So even if you create an esports, which is focused on Asia with a game, if you keep this entertainment factor in your mind when creating the game and in creating the esports scene, you can still ship this entertainment piece around the world, and it will still be watched by a big chunk of audience.
Yeah, agreed. I think we're seeing more and more of these esports tournaments actually having multilingual streams on location, etc. Clash Royale with 9 languages on it's crazy to think that. And you look across the overall viewership, it's quite spread. So we're always going to get, I think, particular countries going to be particularly good at certain genres of game. I mean, a Korean shows up, you forget it if you're playing a MOBA or StarCraft maybe. But then an FPS, the Nordics, tiny little country there, Denmark, and they'll rule the roost. So I think we see those cultural differences, but that becomes part of the narrative anyway. And when it fits into the entertainment format, happy days. It's more to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are obviously cultural differences that play into the types of games people do, but if you actually start to unpick this and look at the human side of it, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the feeling of belonging. If you go into like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or things like that, as you look at, there are common themes in the games that succeed across the globe, such as having guild features and things like that. You can really take it down to basics. There are those basic building blocks that you'll have, and then it comes down to taste and preferences about console, for example. Console's huge in the US and UK, not so much in the rest of Europe and things like that. So that's, so you think games like Call of Duty, we actually have some decent British Call of Duty teams, but we're rubbish at everything else. You're always going to have that, but ultimately people want to belong somewhere, and that's the core of it all.
Have Game opened up belong in Spain at all? No.
I believe they are working on it.
Okay, and I just wondered whether there was any sort of differences in looking at format.
Well, certainly if you look, I think Spain is 9-1 PlayStation to Xbox, whereas the UK is still roughly 1-1. So even within platforms, there's big differences.
Just moving on a bit. I mean, there's been recently a lot of talk about the Overwatch League, and Activision sort of trying to develop a global competition with teams based in various cities, even though the London team at the moment isn't necessarily based in London. Well, it will be, having its home and away, and it's full of Koreans, but still British team, the Spitfires. And they talk about this, to get a franchise, $20 million US, and we've seen a lot of people in the traditional sports area buying into it. The Hershey family, people like that, are bought into this sort of competition. Do you sort of see this as where the future is potentially going? Are they, I know you have to be maybe a little bit political to say Activision is doing a completely stupid thing, or is it maybe?
First of all, I think it's the right move, but I would be careful. We are careful from my side in the UK. We had the same discussions as well. Hey, should we franchise, selling big teams? Everything has its time. So many things are still, we can't even control right now. Technology, viewership behaviors, we don't even understand them fully yet. There's so many moving parts in the ecosystem. So the danger is naturally, if we push it very hard and very big, whoever publisher in the world, and then you don't deliver on it, you burn not only your viewership, you burn as well potential partners who invested, who didn't understand, they just came and said, oh, esports, here, take my money, I want esports. I have no clue what it is. And there's something we have to always be careful and thoughtful about.
I think obviously Blizzard know what they're doing. They regard themselves as the largest entertainment platform in the world, bigger than Netflix. So they're going to make a bolshy move. I think exactly what Mo said, the danger of creating that bubble. I think we've got an opportunity not to create a bubble here within this sustainable, nice area of incremental business for the gaming industry. But really, it's just part of this licensing ecosystem. The idea of, extending the value of that IP that they've created with Overwatch, and looking to actually, franchise effectively. So there's money in it for everyone. But again, delivery. If they don't deliver, that can be, unfortunately, detrimental to the business.
Yeah, I was really concerned about Overwatch League. I can talk a bit more freely about it now. Because for number one, I didn't think it was actually a particularly great esports game to watch unless you were a fan of the game and things like that. And there needs to be a story. The numbers coming out were just astronomical. And we've had a few cycles of this boom and bust in esports. We've had, do you remember Championship Gaming Series, which burned the hands of numerous brands back in the day. That was the late 2000s. So I was very concerned. So I have to admit, I did breathe a bit of a sigh of relief when the numbers came out from the first session. But even so, I think they need to make changes to the game to make it even more viewer-friendly and a story to tell. Yeah,
they said, obviously, from the start that they were developing the game with esports in mind. But interestingly, it didn't actually come out with the tool set required for esports, which was interesting. But then we saw the rumours of Twitch then investing $90 million in just the license from the viewing aspect. Obviously, there was ML-BAM deal with Riot as well. But really, I think we need to go back and say who's paying for that, ultimately. And if that community isn't getting their value worth, so to speak, then it's not going to work in the... Eventually, that community needs to buy into a product or a service, or the sponsor, or buy into a brand that's franchising.
Well, this one, don't get me wrong, there is no right or wrong, especially coming from wargaming. And I remember when we started esports, everyone told me, dude, screw you. You don't have an esports. It's 15 people, doesn't work. Esports, just because, like, let's say Riot has this example, 5 versus 5. I heard as well, other people said, everyone has to be 5 versus 5. You have to have this business model. That's not true. You can try, you have to try, and I'm thankful as well Overwatch is doing something like this, pushing it forward, because it will help us all. Anyone publish it helps us say, hey, what works, what doesn't work. But always, the thing is always we have to be thoughtful.
Yeah, but I always had a bit of confidence because Blizzard, being a massive fan of Blizzard games over the years, if anyone could make it work, Blizzard could. So I had some blind faith there as well, but I was worried for some time. It's like, is it going to work?
I mean, if we look at Dota though, and the international, I mean, that's funded by the community, and I think even you guys have started having some of that for some of your tournaments to lift the prize money to make it more competitive. Is that potentially, to me, a better way to go?
I mean...
Well, as you say, let's try something different.
I think what we're seeing there is what an existing community is doing. I think what we see with this licensing model is what the new generation are doing as they're growing up. And, Overwatch was very much designed to be an extremely inclusive game for a very wide age range. And I think, therefore... you'll start buying into that IP in a different way anyway. The figures, I think, sort of spoke those volumes. We sort of giggle to ourselves saying, well, London Spitfires is a Korean team based in the US, but actually the majority of that fan base on there didn't care. So surprise. So I think we're just seeing trends change, and we need to learn from that, and we need to look at those statistics and work with platforms to understand why that's happening.
Actually, it's interesting because I'm involved with helping run, and you'd know of a thing called Digital Schoolhouse, which is to help getting coding into schools. And we ran an esports tournament, and the kids all wanted to play Rocket League. That was last year. This year, they all want to do Overwatch. So, I think the hype and that, they're seeing it and they're saying, well, hey, I want to do this because I might be able to get into the pro league, so to speak. Just to give any words of wisdom or where you see potentially going from maybe each company's perspective. For an example, with Riot, with League of Legends, don't take this wrong. I mean, to some extent, you could almost say Riot's a one-trick pony. I've heard rumours that there potentially are other games coming out from them.
Riot's game.
As such, but I mean, League of Legends has been at the top of the tree for such a long time. Any sort of words of wisdom, if you're ever looking at one thing, this is what you should look at to make an esports game successful.
Don't be afraid. It's easy to say, because naturally you have like a board behind you, investors, whatever, so there's a lot of financial risk with it. Naturally, if you have like a one-hit wonder, as I worked with Blizzard before, I worked for Wargaming, you always had the same. World of Warcraft was the big online thing. I remember we tried to get another product. Internal, the level of quality is so high that you're afraid or not confirm, hey, we cannot launch it. It doesn't deliver what we expect. Same goes for esports for us as well. The market is evolving so fast, and we have to reinvent ourselves every season. New business models, new approaches. Important is that you don't stop. This is the most important thing. Don't rest. You will fall. Trust me. I had one panel where I said we burned 32. It was Wargaming. We burned 32 million. I said it because yes, a lot of them we burned learning experience because we failed. So it's this something you have to be willing. You have to have the back of the company to say, okay, fall and rise.
James, where do you see tournaments going as such? Maybe.
I mean, tournament. We're a service provider, solution provider, really. It's not our IP. So I think the way in which a company like ESL fits in to play is obviously the events themselves and establishing dates and locations. But ultimately, the IP will sit with teams and players and the games publishers. So I think from our perspective, and one of the most exciting things is that there is consistent new IP coming into the market. That IP needs support and help to create that solution, to actually engage with that community, ultimately listen to them and deliver what they want, which is more content around the IP that they love and passionate about.
And Craig, I'm going to give you two questions. One is the Belong concept rolling out and how that, I mean, I know you're not there now, but how that's going. And the other one, just a 30-second maybe on Wicked Sick.
Okay, so yeah, well, Belong, for me, when we're rolling that out, that was all about building the grassroots of esports in the UK. I mean, a number of us are part of the British Esports Association and the UK group. Is the UK feels quite behind the rest of the world in esports, and where's that disconnect? And one of the things at Game was, well, you've got 350 stores around the UK. Those can act as recruitment hubs and drive participation, drive people involved, and it's gone very, very well. Certainly some of the newer stores like Bristol is a 4,000 square foot gaming arena, and each venue has its own team. So you have like the Bristol Smugglers and you have like the London Nineheads and stuff like that. So, but all aimed at like fostering the grassroots and getting people into esports. Because when we did a study of our user base, there was I think we identified 1.6 million people. I'll stop saying "our" and "we" at some point. And of the reward card database, 1.6 million were new about esports, but were not actually doing anything about it. Number one reason, they didn't know how. Number two, didn't think they were good enough. Number three, didn't think they'd have enough time. Now, all of those are solvable with education and showing people the way forward and encouragement. And I think that number one, people just didn't know how, is where the Belong can really help, because it makes it mainstream. It means you just walk in off the high street and take part. And Wicked Sick is literally just a consultancy. That's my consultancy company.
I was just trying to give you a free plug, that's all.
Yeah,
I'd like to thank Mo, James and Craig for hopefully, if you've got any questions, obviously they're about, and to say the experience you've got there, if you want to ask anything about esports, collar them later. Thanks.
Cool.